Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, please, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO, John Michael, is reading a textbook, cover to cover. Today, Chapter 22, Section 3. Yesterday, we talked about monopolies. We talked about the growing industrial age spreading its tentacles to everything. Carnegie, steel, German, Dutch, Japanese. Today, the world of cities. The world of cities. Here we are. Setting the scene. Please like and subscribe. My name is John Michael, and I would appreciate it very much. Listen to the way I talk. If you like the candor, then I'll talk about other things after I finish this book. We're 550 pages into 1007. Please like and subscribe if you're interested. Otherwise, that's okay. Thank you. Section 2, Chapter 22, Setting the Scene, the World of Cities. In the 1870s, a citizen of Berlin, Germany, boasted of his city's rapid growth. We have already 800,000 inhabitants. Next year, we shall have 900,000, and the year after that, 1 million. He predicted that Berlin's population would soon rival those of Paris and even London. I only know how to do British accents. The population explosion that had begun during the 1700s continued through the 1800s. Cities grew as rural people streamed into urban areas. By the end of the century, European and American cities had begun to take on many of the features of cities today. New heading. That's what the glasses mean. Medicine and population. Between 1800 and 1900, the population of Europe more than doubled. This rapid growth that was not due to larger families. This larger growth was not due to larger families. In fact, families in most industrialized countries had fewer children. Instead, population soared because the death rate fell. People ate better, thanks in part to improved methods of farming, food storage, and distribution. Medical advances and improvements in public sanitation also slowed death rates. The fight against disease. Since the 1600s, scientists have known of microscopic organisms, or microbes. Some scientists speculated that certain microbes might cause specific infectious diseases, yet most doctors scoffed at this germ theory. Not until 1870 did French chemist Louie Pasture clearly show the link between microbes and disease. Pasteur went on to make other major contributions, including the development of vaccines against rabies and anthrax, and discovery of the process called pasteurization, named after him, for killing disease-carrying microbes in milk. Anthrax? Is that old? I thought anthrax was like a man-made thing. Well, I don't know a lot. That's okay. Moving on. In the 1880s, a German doctor, Robert Koch, identified the bacteria that caused tuberculosis, a respiratory disease that claimed about 30 million human lives in the 1800s. The search for a tuberculosis cure, however, took half a century. By 1914, yellow fever and malaria had been traced to microbes carried by mosquitoes. As people understood how germs cause disease, they bathed and changed their clothes more often. In Western cities, better hygiene caused a marked drop in the rate of diseases and death. In the hospital. In the early 1840s, anesthesia was first used to relieve pain during surgeries. The use of anesthetics allowed doctors to experiment with operations that had never before been possible. Yet, throughout the century, hospitals could be dangerous places. Surgery was performed with dirty instruments and dank operating rooms. Often, a patient would survive an operation only to die days later of an infection. For the poor, being admitted to the hospital was often a death sentence. Wealthy and middle-class patients insisted on treatment in their own homes. The very first requirement in a hospital, said a British nurse, Florence Nightingale, is that it should do the sick no harm. I agree, Florence. That makes sense. As an army nurse during the Crimean War, Nightingale insisted on better hygiene in field hospitals. After the war, she worked to introduce sanitary measures in British hospitals. She also founded the world's first school of nursing. The English surgeon Joseph Lister discovered how antiseptics prevented infection. He insisted that surgeons wash their hands before operating and sterilize their instruments. Eventually, the use of antiseptics drastically reduced the deaths of infection. If I am recalling correctly, was it Lister? There was some proponent of washing your hands who was laughed out of the room by the medical elite of the time. And though he was correct, he eventually died in shame, excommunicated, in a way, from the medical community. And it might be that guy, Joseph Lister, but I don't know. And I don't even know if that's true. I just heard it somewhere. The life of the cities. You can look it up. Maybe it's Joseph Lister, maybe it's some other guy. Maybe it doesn't exist. I don't know. Just saying what I think I know. And I admit that I might be wrong. Please like and subscribe if you like somebody who admits that they might be wrong. I've been wrong before. Why wouldn't I be wrong again? But also, I've definitely heard it from a source that I tend to trust. I just don't know if the guy's name is Joseph Lister. I don't know if he's from a different time. But washing hands, generally, the idea is the guy said, we should probably wash our hands. And for that, he died in shame because it was a ridiculed idea. The life of the cities. As industrialization progressed, cities came to dominate the West. City life, as old as civilization itself, underwent dramatic changes. The changing city landscape. Growing wealth and industrialization altered the basic layout of Western cities. City planners gouged out spacious new squares and boulevards. They lined these avenues with government buildings, offices, department stores, and theaters. The most expensive urban renewal or rebuilding of the poor areas of a city took place in Paris in the 1850s. Georges Haussmann, chief planner of Napoleon III, destroyed many tangled medieval streets full of tenement housing. In their place, he built wide boulevards and splendid public buildings. The project put many people to work, increasing the threat of social unrest. What? The project put many people to work, decreasing the threat of social unrest. That makes more sense. The wide boulevards also made it harder for rebels to put up barricades and easier for troops to reach any part of the city. Gradually, settlement patterns shifted. In most American cities, the rich lived in pleasant neighborhoods on the outskirts of city. The poor crowded into slums near the city center, within reach of the factories. Trolley lines made it possible to live in one part of the city and work in another. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I'm just saying, not that it makes sense in the sense that it's good, but it makes sense in the sense that, of course, you're going to live close to the industrial part if you are working in the industrial part. Hence those enclaves of poorness. But now it's different. But then it was that. And it makes sense for then. For now, it's different. Sidewalks, sewers, and skyscrapers. Paved streets made urban areas more livable. First gas lamps, then electric streetlights increased safety at night. Cities organized police forces and expanded fire protection. Beneath the streets, sewage systems made cities healthier places to live. City planners knew that clean water supplies were needed to combat epidemics of cholera and tuberculosis. The massive new sewer system of London and Paris were costly, but they cut death rates dramatically. You can visit the sewers in Paris, or at least you could in the year 2000, when I was a wee lad, small child. And they were kind of nice as far as excrement, waste, water in a tube goes. In the 1900s, architects using steel to construct soaring buildings. The steel Eiffel Tower became a symbol of Paris. American architects like Louis Sullivan pioneered a new structure, the skyscraper. In large cities, single-family middle-class homes gave way to multi-story apartment buildings. Slums. Not a laughing matter. Despite efforts of improved cities, urban life remained harsh for the poor. Some working-class families could afford better clothing, newspapers, and tickets to the music hall, but they went home to small, cramped row houses or tenements in overcrowded neighborhoods. In these worst tenements, whole families were often crammed into single rooms. Unemployment or illness meant lost wages that could ruin a family. High rates of crime and alcoholism were a constant curse. Conditions had improved somewhat from early industrial revolution, but slums remained a fact of city life. Moving on from that doom and gloom, the lure of the city. Despite their drawbacks, cities attracted millions of new residents. New residents were drawn as much by the excitement as by the promise of work. For tourists, too, cities were magnetic centers of action. One reporter discussed the hustle and bustle of holiday crowds in London. Cyclists of both sexes covered the roads. River streamers and pleasure boats carried their thousands of Kew and the upper reaches of the Thames. The London parks were crowded. The botanic gardens and zoological gardens formed great attractions, and the flowers of the Battersea Park drew large crowds every day. The Times of London quoted in Crisis in History of London English, 1066 to 1945, by a man named Henning, Henning. Music halls, opera houses, and theaters provided entertainment for every taste. Museums and libraries offered education opportunities. Sports from tennis to bare-knuckle boxing drew citizens of all classes. Few of these enjoyments were available in country villages. And that's why people would move there, because they want to go see people fight each other and play tennis and be near factories and look at skyscrapers and go to open mics. Working class struggles. New heading. Workers tried to improve the harsh conditions of industrial life. They protested low wages, long hours, unsafe conditions, and constant threat of unemployment. At first, business owners and governments tried to silence protesters. Strikes and unions were illegal. Demonstrations were crushed. By mid-century, workers slowly began to make progress. They formed mutual aid societies, self-help groups, to aid sick and injured workers. Men and women joined socialist parties or organized unions and revolutions. The revolutions of the 1830s and 1848 left vivid images of worker discontent. What? They formed mutual aid societies, self-help groups to aid sick or injured workers. Men and women joined socialist parties or organized unions. The revolutions of 1830 and 1848 left vivid images of worker discontent. By the late 1800s, most Western countries had granted all men the right to vote. Workers also won the right to organize unions to bargain on their behalf. Germany legalized labor unions in 1869. Britain and Austria and France followed. Unions grew rapidly. In France, membership grew from 140,000 to 1890 to over 1 million in 1912. And see how that worked out for the Germans. Pressured by unions, reformers, and working class voters, it's not that I'm against unions, it's just that the Germans were the first to adopt it, and then they were a menace a couple of years later. Not saying that causation yields the other thing, but they were the first to do the socialist thing, and then they, were pretty bad pretty quickly after that. Not a good piece of evidence for the socialist scheme. I'm just saying it's if you're looking purely at give me 1 second to finish my thought, please. If you're looking at the evidence, I'm just saying the Germans were the first to market with that socialist idea of the unions. And I'm not saying unions are bad. Unions are great. They're also not always great. But they were the first to do it. And they also, shortly thereafter, were very bad. Pressured by unions, reformers, and working class voters, governments passed laws to regulate worker conditions. Over time, laws were passed outlawing child labor and banning the employment of women in mines. But men could still get black lung, no worries. Other laws limited work hours and improved safety. We actually probably should enact those no mines for women and children now because of what we do in the Congo, is it? By 1909, British coal miners had won an 8-hour day, settling a standard for workers in other countries. By 1909, British coal miners had won an 8-hour day, settling standards for workers in other countries. First in Germany and thence elsewhere, Western governments established old age pensions, as well as disability insurance for workers who were hurt or became ill. These programs protected workers from poverty once they were no longer able to work. Workers' compensation, in today's language. Always get a lawyer. Don't go at it alone. Trust Morgan & Morgan. Or somebody, I don't know. Rising standards of living. I'm not advocating for Morgan & Morgan. They're just the one that came to mind because they do nationwide advertisements. I think they do nationwide advertisements. If they're localized in Los Angeles and they're advertising nationwide, I don't know why they would do that. Whatever. Rising standards of living. Wages varied throughout the industrialized world, with unskilled laborers earning much less than skilled workers. Women received less than half the pay of men doing the same work. Farm laborers barely scraped by during the economic slump of the late 1800s. Periods of unemployment brought desperate hardships to industrial workers and helped boost union membership. Overall, though, standards of living for workers did rise. The standard of living measures the quality and availability of necessities and comforts of society. Families ate more varied diets, lived in better homes, and dressed in inexpensive, mass-produced clothing. I got this in Kohl's in Austin, Texas. I could have gotten it in Kohl's in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Advances in medicine improved health. Some workers moved to suburbs, traveling to work on subways and trams. Still, the gap between workers and the middle class widened. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the weather. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you enjoy your life moving forward. If I don't see you again, and if I do see you again, I hope you enjoy your life moving forward as well. Goodbye. God bless.